Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's event. My name is Brett Ward, the General Manager of International Marketing for Brickworks Building Products. And whether you're joining us here in Australia or anywhere across the globe, we thank you for being with us this evening. Tonight, we're excited to bring you our first international inDETAIL event for the year. In the spirit of reconciliation, Brickworks acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all gathered and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present and emerging. Now at Brickworks, we're proud to provide a platform for the sharing of ideas and discussion surrounding architecture and design. So tonight, it gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce our guest speaker from the United States, Lorcan O'Herlihy of Lorcan O'Herlihy Architects, known as LOHA. We're delighted that Lorcan has been able to join us and we look forward to his presentation. I'm also pleased to once again welcome architect, writer and educator Stephen Barrady, who will formally introduce Lorcan and host the Q&A session at the end of tonight's presentation. Thank you for joining us and please enjoy tonight's inDETAIL event.
Throughout the past 110 years, the face of building materials has continued to evolve. We're here for a lifetime of living. This is Brickworks. We are a foundation for today's lifestyle and a leader for today's style. Local and international innovation. Distinctive and luxurious products. Building inspiration and innovation with an unmatched standing of style. This is Brickworks.
Thank you, Brett. Hello, Lorcan. Thank you for agreeing to be our latest international speaker in the Brickworks inDETAIL speaker series. Welcome. Since founding his firm Lorcan O'Herlihy Architects, or LOHA, in 1994, Lorcan O'Herlihy has built more than 90 projects across 3 continents and has been published in more than 20 countries. His commitment to design excellence in commercial, educational and residential projects earned him a nomination to the US Academy of Arts and Letters, and just a few weeks ago, he was awarded the 2021 AIA Los Angeles Gold Medal. LOHA has also received over 100 national and international design awards, including the AIA California Distinguished Practice Award and AIA Los Angeles Firm of the Year Award. In 2018, LOHA was named the #1 design firm in the US by Architect magazine. Lorcan O'Herlihy is currently an adjunct professor at the University of Southern California and serves on the board of directors of Storefront for Art and Architecture. Last year, Lorcan published his latest book, Architecture is a Social Act, a very apt title for the work of LOHA, but also a sentiment that will resonate with all architects in Australia and the USA. I believe the range of projects Lorcan will present tonight engages with the issues of our times, allowing us all to reflect upon how we practice and how we might be able to improve our respective built environments. Over to you, Lorcan.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you here to discuss my work. I want to thank Stephen Barrady for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here with you all during this highly unique moment in our history. No matter where we live on this planet, we have all been forced to adjust to this new way of life. During the pandemic, we realized how important it is to have physical connection with each other, which reinforces my belief that it is more important than ever to design spaces that encourage and promote social equity and human interaction. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the driving forces behind the work which addresses the challenges we're facing in a rapidly changing world. I believe that as architects, we have a responsibility to cities and the people who occupy them. By 2050, it is expected that 70% of the world population will be urban. That being said, managing this intense urban growth has become one of the most significant challenges of our time. It is crucial that we think about how we can design in such a way that we can make cities more livable and equitable for all. I believe that architecture is a social act, and that the role of the architect is to do work of consequence. It's not about designing a building as an isolated object, but how to use architecture as a tool for engaging in politics, aesthetics, smart growth, and social structures. We engage with housing, urbanism, and culture to elevate broader communities and transform cities. That's what drives our work. I'm fascinated with urban life, and particularly public space. We are living in a time where, although we have become more connected than ever through social media and other technologies, which in a sense, I think we would all agree, is the new public space, we are paradoxically more and more isolated by those very tools. I would argue that the need for physical human contact is even more important than ever. As we look at the urban sprawl of Los Angeles, where my practice is based, one of the densest conditions in the US, with all its freeways and neighborhoods, and not nearly enough open public space, it is one of our tasks as architects to find opportunities to design spaces that shape interaction and cultural evolution. It's important to design cities as dynamic networks. This is critical to our work. It's critical to the work of architects as well. From top-down solutions to generative bottom-up strategies, both of which achieve greater connectivity and diversity. That's essential. We need to look at solutions, dynamic networks. We are embracing more so the bottom-up strategies, perhaps more so than top-down. Have you ever looked at the idea that bottom-up strategies, in a sense, are fascinating? In a sense, they're created by people in cities. The image you can see on the left here is a collection of artists in the 70s called ASCO, whose work was influenced by public policies and planning that was creating economic and geographic disparity in East LA, an area of Los Angeles which has had a critical area which has not had growth. And this wonderful artists embraced that concept and wanted to demonstrate opposition to that concept. So in the image you can see how they are reclaiming the city. On the right you can see also a more common scene, a group of skateboarders who are quite literally carving away this public space and reactivating it. It's an inventive way of handling things. I certainly have seen a lot of this living in Venice for many years. Movements such as these, that in many ways can be considered a form of social activism, have ironically inspired many contemporary planned public spaces, such as skate parks and parklets. As you can see in the images, small interventions in the city, really critical to bring life. And in a sense, I'm convinced that this has been inspired by the more guerrilla effects that people have in terms of doing it on their own. Cities embrace that and they bring to the table solutions as well. Likewise, I'm also intrigued by some of the more top-down cultural institutional strategies when done well. Spaces that are designed by artists that often blur that public-private divide. Here on the left is Chris Burton's Urban Light, a wonderful installation at LACMA. Frankly, it's the most important piece in that museum, but it's really for the people outside. And it's at LA County Museum of Art. Jessica Stockholder's Color Jam on the right is located in Chicago, where the artist quite literally created a 3D painting at a major city intersection. I'm inspired by artists. I'm inspired how they engage cities. So to me, that is part of the DNA of what we try to do, and inspired by the people who are also embracing this idea of cultural evolutions within cities. Thus, Chris and Jessica are doing that, and that's something that drives our work. In our work, we likewise bring aspects of the public realm into our projects. This idea of borrowing space from the private domain is challenging, but we are committed to this principle, whether it be through small or large gestures. We believe that this brings value to the projects and benefits how people live. We look at the connection between our projects and the street, as there is great energy in cities and we want to tap into that. Here you can see one of our projects which literally created a strategic void right in the middle so that you can connect the building to the street. Our work is derived from and speaks to a city's history and culture, beginning with the facts on the ground, working from the bottom up and not the top down. We aim to get everyday people a space of respect, a sense of ownership, and a true stake in their city streets. You might say we are engaged in the aesthetics of living. All of our projects are designed with the same DNA and comes in various scales, as you can see by these examples, from small to extra large projects. And they all house a diverse cross-section of people and places. Whether it be renovation of historical architectural home, such as the Schulman house, which I will discuss shortly, or a housing project for the unhoused, which is our MLK 1101 project, or conceivably off-campus student housing and along a busy commercial corridor, which is our Granville 1500 project, or a museum project, small nonprofit project, which is in Detroit, or conceivably a significant brand like Nike. Again, each project is approached with the same core design principles in mind. The first project, as mentioned, I will discuss is our Schulman house renovation. This restoration and modernization effort applies contemporary measures of performance and design to a historical building, enhance its continued life as a family residence. That's critical to this project. This was not a museum artifact, it is a home. It was a home for Julius Schulman, and we were commissioned to design for a new family. The Julius Schulman home and studio was originally commissioned by photographer Julius Schulman. It was designed by Rafael Soriano and completed in 1950. It's one of 12 remaining built by Soriano projects. So he has built quite a few, but only 2, I believe, remain. The only one this is also the only one that's an altered steel frame. And it's a City of Los Angeles historical cultural monument. So we were engaged to not simply restore the significant home, but to update the space so that it could meet the specific needs of a young family. The home was inspired by the original case study houses, which were, in a sense, the testing ground for architectural ideas in Los Angeles in the 20th century. In a sense, Soriano was not one of the case study architects, but he was inspired by it. He spent a number of years working both with Richard Neutra and Schindler, so his DNA was very consistent with what was going on here in Los Angeles during the time. For this project, we did undertake extensive research into the materiality and design intentions of the original structure, as well as other buildings from that period. So we had an intense research component to this project before we started it. As a notable landmark, the Schulman home was restored under strict preservation guidelines supervised by the Los Angeles Office of Historical Resources. Due to the home's status as a residence and not a museum, we were granted a little bit more flexibility in upgrading it. And that was very important in a sense because we could bring elements and components that works for families. And that's a critical component of these type of projects, that when you embrace these type of historical landmarks, one has to also see to the future and see that it's a living organism and not simply an artifact of the past. So we did take a sensitive and light approach, which brought, in a sense, the timeless nature of the Soriano's wonderful design. Here you can see the plan, very simple partie. It was a 3-bedroom house with the living dining kitchen. You can see the carve out in the middle, which is the entry alley, in a sense, all wrapped in cork. You'll see an image further on. And then there was a separate structure, which was Schulman's studio, in which he was intimately involved with in terms of his photography. Equally so in terms of the representation of how we wanted to handle the project. And we wanted to really recognize certain aspects of the project that we had to follow, but also we were able and open to the idea that we could, in a sense, upgrade the kitchens, upgrade the bathrooms, which is appropriate, in a sense, for a family. And that's what's interesting about the projects here in Los Angeles. You have that opportunity if it's a home. So in this particular drawing here, you can see the darker green, we had to protect and maintain it. And you can see just small components, where it's the fireplace or other aspects of it. The lighter green is what we repaired it, replaced in kind for that matter. And so we were able to do it and repair it. The blue, we were able to replace, and you can see in terms of the kitchen area, the middle area where the kitchen is, we're able to replace that, which is important. And also the yellowish green, we were able to alter it. So a variety of different approaches we had to take throughout this whole design process. Thus, it had to be calibrated, and also working closely with the Office of Historical Resources, we had to do it right. One of the other key issues the project was keeping with the indoor-outdoor California lifestyle popularly promoted in Julius Schulman's photographs. And that certainly was the case with this project. The original system of sequence glass planes was restored and then, in a sense, paired with a parallel system of adjustable screening veils. That's something we brought to the table. There was one issue with the house, which was that there was an ample amount of light that came in, but it was starting to fade the interiors, and it was rather uncomfortable. So we actually, in a sense, added this layer to the whole project, which in a sense elevated the design, which I'm excited about. So these transitional spaces created these screen-in patios And they were key to the project. We had to create comfortable spaces. So you'll see throughout the project, these idea screens were infiltrated throughout the house to really play with the idea of muting the direct sunlight inside. And here you can see the completed project where you can see looking through the landscape. And the landscape was actually done by Mia Lair, who's a local landscape architect here in Los Angeles. But this is an ideal image. You can see the layers that we were trying to create from the landscaping, filtering through these outdoor rooms, so to speak, which were screened in, and then they carve out in the opening voids throughout the house. You can start to see the layers and the kind of components of the design, which was celebrating Soriano's solution. And here's a small example of one of the screened, outdoor screened rooms where you can begin to see that can you create opportunities to be outside. Now what's interesting about this one particular screened porch, Schulman wanted the screens and Soriano did not. And that was a very interesting moment between the two of them. Ultimately, the owner, being Schulman, won out. And so the screens were put in so that so in effect he could actually be outside, because needless to say, Los Angeles, which certainly may be the case in Australia, there's mosquitoes and other varmints outside who are going to try to create your, try to infect your site. And this is one way of being able to mitigating that issue. So very interesting story behind the two of them, and Schulman won out in the end. And here you can see the palette of materials that we were working with, the existing fireplace. The cabinetry was a new component we brought to the table. So this was a custom cabinetry that we designed here. But that was interesting. The Office Historical Resources were happy with that. They had no concerns about it. They wanted to make sure that the actual project was a livable organism. Now, thus you can see Jonah, who's in the picture with his child in this picture. So beyond this particular image, you can see the studio. His artist studio beyond it, photography studio. And there's another detail, the living room. So in a sense, the custom cabinetry was introduced to the project, a new woodwork. Also an integrated shelving system was incorporated. So what was interesting was there was existing structure there was existing cabinetry, but we were able to reinterpret that for more of a contemporary approach, which is fascinating to us because I believe that's how one can handle these type of projects. You embrace the critical components that you replace in kind, but also you have the opportunity to further the home into the 21st century. And here's another view of the studio, very minimal. We did pour lightweight concrete to upgrade the space, and you can see beyond in this image, you can see the cabinetry where the books were, among others. So that was a space that Schulman used, and now of course the new owner uses it as well. And there you can certainly see the cork entry. Again, we replaced in kind the cork, which is a critical component, and we also incorporated a skylight because that area was somewhat dark. So that element of the skylight you can see in the left-hand image really brought a piece of architecture to the space that actually complemented the space. It was a way of bringing more light. So that was a wonderful approach. Also the image on the right, you can see the cork entry on the left, and you can see the slippage of view into the kitchen, which was upgraded to more appropriate use today. So these are functional spaces. They create opportunities for new design interventions, and that was very wonderful for this project. Very nice way of dealing with old and new. How do you keep existing, how do you replace in kind, and how do you bring new architecture and new design to other spaces? A few more images. You can see within the kitchen area there was a cubby nook where we renovated and actually restored, and you can see that the family is sitting there on the left-hand side. On the right is the bathroom they were able to raise and redo in terms of being a more contemporary bathroom that was appropriate for today. So we reconfigured the home's plan to accommodate these aspects. In addition to that, we also added a guest bedroom into the overall layout of the house. So that was very important as well. One other key issue was that, as mentioned before, the kitchen and bathrooms were fully redesigned and all the plumbing and water heating systems were upgraded to exceed current standards. That's a very important element. And the reason why that was critical was that if you look at a conventional HVAC system, one would have these units on the roof. But what was important was to create that simple, clean line of the roof. Thus, we came with a zoned HVAC system. So as opposed to a centralized cooling system, what we did is we created a system of similar small energy efficient HVAC system into zoned areas. So we had smaller units which were actually incorporated in cabinetry. Thus, we did not have a larger unit on this roof, which was critical to the design. So that was a way that we were able to incorporate more contemporary, more progressive approach to this system that made the design to a better place to live. So that flat roof line was critical to the design, as you can see. A very exciting project for me to work on. It's really exciting to be able to see these projects that I respect and honor. And Soriano was certainly a fascinating architect. He wasn't perhaps as celebrated as Neutron Schindler, but he was certainly, some of his work was equal, if not better, than his colleagues. So the next project I'm going to talk about is about our Formosa 1140 project in West Hollywood. So the primary focus on this project was to create much needed housing and a green space through a public-private partnership between our client and the city. Interesting concept. We wanted to create an opportunity not only provide housing, but also create more green space within West Hollywood, which is in dire need. So that was a critical component of the project. Now, you may not know this, but Los Angeles famously lacks urban public space. It is known as a privatized city, very little public space. So, in a sense, Los Angeles is one of the cities within the United States that has fewest amount of green space. In fact, it's the 74th out of 100 large cities in Los Angeles. So our goal here at LOHA is to bring green space where we can, and we can bring it by incorporating or borrowing space from private developments, and that's what we did on this one. West Hollywood was equally problematic where the specific project was. That also has far worse green space. So it was exciting for us to engage the city to create this opportunity. Here's a couple of views of the existing site where you can see that Formosa 1140 is located in the older part of West Hollywood, which was once filled with small craftsmen and duplexes. The block has long since been transformed into a nearly unbroken wall of very generic 1970s stucco apartments. We wanted to really challenge that concept. So our job was to design an 11-unit housing complex on the site of a derelict house. As you can see in this image right here, it was, in my opinion, a project that had no architectural significance. But during this particular time in West Hollywood, there was an enormous amount of development. And we got some pushback to try to, if we can, save that house and still incorporate 11-unit building on that site, which was fundamentally impossible. So we took an alternative approach. As opposed to trying to keep the house, we wanted to go back to the city with an alternative strategy and see if they liked the idea. So after months of back and forth between city officials, neighbors, our client, and our office, we proposed to demolish the house and replace it with 11-unit housing and a public accessible pocket park on the site. What was very exciting, the city liked the idea. This was one of the first pocket parks that is accessible to the public on private land. So this idea of the blurred edges between public domain and private domain. It's something that I think is essential in how cities could grow. So with that in mind, we came up with an alternative idea, and you can see right here, right here is a critical issue to the project. So key to the project was the idea of modifying the conventional internalized outdoor courtyard typology, which you see all over Los Angeles, and instead bring the courtyard space outward into the public realm by placing it adjacent to the structure and open to the street. So you can see in these diagrams, you can see the conventional courtyard strategy, which is the two images on the left. Conventional courtyard leads to a series of internalized common open spaces, but not accessible to the public. Whereas on the right-hand side, if you push the density to one end, you create a pocket park, and that's accessible from the street. Very interesting concept that you can overlay the common open space in these projects with the public pocket park. Crucial to do that. So this effectively bisected the parcel lengthwise, but provided 1/3, close to 4,600 square feet, for the residents, the neighbors, and the general public to share. By eliminating this private courtyard, it also pushed the housing volume to the side, which allowed all the residential units to look out on the park, which is another wonderful component of it. As opposed to looking at a courtyard, internalized courtyard, you can in effect be looking out at a pocket park. So your frontage is wonderful. You've got a 45-foot by 100-foot space, which can be incorporated into the wonderful idea of a green space. And this is really critical, and this is the way that we can make this unique public-private partnership work with cities. That's crucial. So can the city, in effect, lease the space from the client in perpetuity? And that's what we did. So it was a first for West Hollywood, meaning that our client leased this private land to the city for $1 for 99 years. The city then paid for the park and will continue to upkeep it over the years. So very interesting concept of architects working as strategists to work with cities and clients to create these opportunities for everybody. And you can see in this drawing section quality where you have the circulation on the third level, which you have the balconies at the second level, circulation on the third level, accessing the units on top, and also accessing the first level from the park and the units below. So they're basically essentially series of townhouses, 11 total. And there's a view of the project. So the color and metal exterior created a strong contrast. The neighborhood dominated, as I mentioned, by these stucco boxes. This was an opportunity not only to look at aesthetics, but look at a social agency. I'm convinced that one has to do both. It's not simply enough to bring social agency to projects, but you have to, as an architect, bring aesthetics, bring innovation, bring artistry to these projects. So this design was really a series of red and orange panels out of metal that also not only provided shade to the units, but also created apertures and openings for views. So a very interesting way of choreographing a building. So the variety of privacy screens and balconies did accomplish that. You have this wonderful experience inside where we're framing views, but also we placed perforated metal where we wanted to shade the units as well. So this gives a very visual and visceral, in a sense, connection to the public park. Coincidentally, the color of the Formosa Cafe, which is located down the street, inspired the strong palette for this project, which also brings an interesting point about the idea of context. Los Angeles, context is where you find it. So I chose to use color as context for this project. Also, another side note, which is quite interesting, my dad, who was a film actor, frequented this Formosa Cafe with his colleagues Orson Welles and Marlon Brando and John Houseman. So in one sense, it was very close to my heart when I had the opportunity to design this project, literally a stone's throw from Formosa Cafe. And there's a view of the park with the building beyond. So in a sense, all the units can look out to the park. And what's interesting, where the camera was positioned is the apartment building on the other side that also has a view of the park. So it's very interesting to stitch these pocket parks. It provides wonderful frontage for both buildings to be able to look at a park. And I want to say it's also about the aesthetics. It's also about artistry. One has to bring that to the table. You can hybridize both, and that's what we try to do with all our work. More views of the circulation. You can see on the left-hand side, that's the third floor, which accesses the units. Again, you can see the metal skin on the left-hand side, which screens and provides shading, but also openings for views. Right-hand side is a view from the park looking at the building. And one last view of the park looking at the building. Again, architecture about hybridizing social agency, hybridizing that with artistry, and also politics to be able to make this happen. So the city runs the park, even though it's on private land. So this idea of creating a green loop offers opportunities throughout the city. It's a way of reimagining the city, for want of a better word. And I think the challenge is the existing formidable grid that cities are kind of in a sense constrained by. But if one can imagine these pocket parks or greening of the city allows for ample ways in which one can actually navigate the city, it's a fascinating concept that I'm convinced could exist. So ultimately, we believe this is a model of finding opportunities where that in a sense did not exist in the past. It makes lively and engaging buildings into small parks. It all helps neighborhoods. That's the bottom line. And also brings people together. Continuing this relationship between indoor and outdoor spaces, and in this case, challenging sites, I'm going to now discuss our SL 11024 project in Westwood. This project serves as a hinge building between two ecologies. It engages the UCLA campus as well as the larger Westwood community. Likewise, its design straddles two challenging environments: historically sensitive building and demanding hillside topography. So this project is fascinating in a sense. It's right across from the Neutra Strathmore Apartments, another historical landmark. Coincidentally, I did get this project because I had done a previous project next to a Schindler project, which was in West Hollywood, the Schindler House. So I landed this commission because they felt that there was a way that I and collectively LOHA can handle building next to historical landmarks. So critical issue here was it was in Westwood, it's student housing, but also engaging the city. It's located in a very dense part of the city, Westwood. It's adjacent to UCLA, which of course, as I mentioned, right next to one of LA's historical treasures, another landmarked project by Richard Neutra called the Strathmore Apartments. There you can see the image of the project on the left, and you can see the Strathmore Apartments, which are right next to it. It may be difficult to see in the image on the left, but it's right next to the lower volume of our new building. Right page north of that part of the building is where the Strathmore Apartments are. There's a site plan where you can begin to see our project, which is in a sense very complex wedge-shaped site. It actually dropped over 50 feet from one corner of Strathmore Apartment all the way down to Levering. There's a 50-foot drop, very complex and challenging site. And you can see the Strathmore Apartments, which are shown in this site plan, across the street from it. So very important project. Again, how to build next to historical landmark played a big role. Our scheme did respond to all these constraints that were established by the neighborhood. And you can see in these diagrams here is how do you deal with the complexity of a 50-foot drop in the site? How do you deal with the complexity of the massing next to a historical landmark, which is only a 2-story structure? All these elements led to the stepped up massing, as you can see in these diagrams. So manipulating the building to respond accordingly, that was crucial. We pushed the density of the building to where the larger buildings were. There's 6 to 7-story buildings one end of the site, whereas the Strathmore Apartments was on the one end where we dropped it to 2 stories. And you can see these on these diagrams. And also in this model as well. You can see the lower massing is connected to the Strathmore Apartments, whereas the density is pushed back where the larger buildings are. And there's a view of the project completed. I'm really excited about this project. It was a very complex site, a very unique way of dealing with the city and how you stitch in these urban areas these types of projects, but also push the artistry, push the aesthetics, but also recognize the value of having to look at how people engage each other. That was critical. The stepped up massing afforded us the opportunity to have these outdoor spaces where people could conceivably be able to connect each other, whether it's students or, for that matter, there are a number of people in the building as well who are in the UCLA medical profession as well. There's doctors and nurses who live there as well. Very interesting hybridizing of 2 ecologies, the ecology of students and the ecology of just normal people who have jobs in the city. So hybridizing those 2 is very interesting. And there's a view of the outdoor spaces. So again, this idea of outdoor spaces for residences throughout. There's a vertical activated edges as well, because one can see down on the street. You can see from one level to the other how people can connect each other, and equally so, you can see the Strathmore Apartments in the distance there, the white buildings. So there's a way of connecting not only in plan but also in section within that's critical to how you can do how you can really approach architecture. Think of it as being a living organism, how it connect not only adjacencies but also in section. And there's a detail of facade of it. So our material choices for the building was, again, material that I'm very committed to. It's a metal exterior. This one primarily was aluminum because it was near, relatively close to the ocean. So to avoid rust, we did commission the project. We commissioned aluminum as an exterior material. And that's what the white component is. All the cuts in the building they returned was, and then you can see those in the green colors, that was cement board. So it was a hybrid of 2 different materials. The perimeter was wrapped in white metal, and then all the cuts were cement board, which were painted a chartreuse green, which is interesting because in evening there's a light glow to it, which is very interesting. So here you can see that image where you begin to see how the spaces inside have this wonderful kind of feel to kind of vibrancy to the cuts and the strategic voids throughout the buildings. So now we're going to move over to away from Westwood to an area where there's a crippling reality of what we're dealing with in Los Angeles. There is an unprecedented housing crisis that we all know, and there's a massive inequity, and that's something that we're aware of. There's a growing homeless population throughout Southern California region. We're dealing with it in Los Angeles. It's something that is everyday issue. When you drive around the city right now, you see it everywhere. We have to address this issue. So our practice is deeply embedded in this critical issue, trying to solve it. This project represents one effort to do that. It's a supportive housing project. It's in a region which is South Los Angeles, where there's a need for housing, critical housing. It addresses homelessness and it engages the surrounding community and brings equity design to this typology. We are convinced that all good design has to be available to everybody. That's something that drives our work. We don't see a variation on that. We don't see supportive housing or housing for the unhoused, for want of a better word, as being less design commitment. We see design commitment on all levels, and this represents that. Just as some background on the project, it's located in South Los Angeles and is also one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. 33% of its population has an income below the poverty line and a college graduation rate of a meager 4%. This contrast is a lingering effect of redlining, the deliberate segregation of blacks and other minorities who were permitted to live, but never to own property and to live in homes that they own. That's critical. They were never given that opportunity, and this represents a way of trying to challenge that. But even 50 years later, after those laws were made illegal, much of the racial and socioeconomic makeup of this area remains racially segregated. While individuals are no longer confined to communities based on race, racial boundaries still exist. They're defined by the disparity that defines the city between the haves and have-nots. That exists today. So redlining exists today, but it's framed a different way, and that's something we're trying to tackle here. So this phenomenon is hitting Los Angeles particularly hard. A growing population of homeless, which now ranks close to 70,000 individuals, live in the city streets. So we at LOHA feel a commitment to do work of consequence and to be able to tackle this in the best way we can contribute. In 2014, we were approached by our client to design a 26-unit supportive housing complex on Martin Luther King Boulevard for formerly homeless veterans and chronically homeless families. The site was a vacant, unimproved lot. As you can see, it's right next to McDonald's, next to a strip mall. It's a hodgepodge of low-rise apartment complexes on the street, but you can certainly see the wide streets. You can see the dynamic of the space. It's wanting for something that's dynamic and wanting to provide pedestrian life, and that's what was lacking. So we envisioned the project as an opportunity to demonstrate how good design can bring that to this city, bring to this part of the city. Frankly, to the underserved neighborhoods. That's what's crucial to this project. So good architects should be available to all levels, socioeconomic levels of our community. Our massing strategy, as you can see in this diagram, was to create a simple L shape and create, in a sense, an outdoor living room. That's what's represented by the green space in these diagrams. So we started with that partie. Given that we had very great constraints in terms of budget, we couldn't certainly provide, which doesn't make any sense, but we couldn't provide the parking underground from cost reasons, so we had to elevate the project and elevate the podium and tuck the parking underneath it. Now, we think this is ridiculous that the city still requires parking for a homeless. It doesn't make sense. The dynamic of that requirements has to change. So we're in the process of working with a number of people in the city to try to revisit that concept to negate the need for parking in these type of projects. And we're getting some traction right now, but when we did this project, we were required. So thus you can see the diagram that we worked on. So we lifted the building, thus you had this outdoor living room, which was above. We then folded it down to the street, so there was a visceral connection to the street. And that is represented by the staircase that you'll see in these further images. There's the partie, or the image, the axonometric of the project. an L-shaped building in terms of sustainable approach, which is very exciting. All the units were accessed from the exterior. So a very simple, very direct way of dealing with ecological issues. All the units are accessed from exterior, meaning they can open the door, open a window on one side, open a window on the other. You have cross ventilation. So it's a really nice quality of space and light. You have light for a number of sources in these type of projects that we're doing. That's something we drive a lot of our work. We want this opportunity to create passive design strategy with all our work. Thus, you can see the diagram, the L, you can see the outdoor living room, and then you can see community room that we placed on the corner. That's critical as well. We do have retail on the street level, and there's a section you can see right there where, again, very, very important in terms of each project we do has to have crucial sustainable approaches. So each apartment is designed to receive sunlight and cross ventilation, reducing the need for heating and cooling, of course, and artificial light. The project employs the latest strategies, environmental responses, forward-thinking green design to maximize space and also benefit the entire community. So the building was certified LEED Gold, which we're very excited about. And it features high efficiency heating and cooling, appliance and fixtures, solar water heating, electric vehicle charging, certainly bike parking as well. So we're trying to encourage all these elements to be incorporated in the project, and that diagram starts to reflect all those components. We also, which is extremely important, is we have a green roof that folds down to the roof, as you can see, over the community room. So bringing landscape critical to this project also plays a big role. And there's a view from the street. So you can see on the street level, the retail is on the street level. Above that was the community room. Also, the scale and proportion of that volume on the left that we designed, it really connects to the scale of the two-story apartments next to it. So that was, again, a proportional idea. We pushed the density next to the McDonald's, which is not essential to have to respond accordingly to McDonald's. So the nature and the adjacencies of the buildings played a big role in terms of the overall design as well, responding to the context of where it is. So again, these retail units are interesting as well because they will generate income to help subsidize the housing while providing workforce training. So these spaces are going to benefit not only the building, but also provide job training, which I think is critical to this. And it's also important for them so they can transition back into society. And there you can see this idea that a stoop. We created at the entry a place for people who happen to be on the street. If they have no place to go, they can come up the stairs and sit there. So we pushed back the actual fence or the gate to the housing complex further up on the top. So that means people can go out and hang out on that stoop, and which is very exciting because people who frankly don't have during the day a place to rest can come up and sit there. And this is a great way of actually encouraging interaction among residents and the community. There you can see the existing neighborhood contacts where the two-story volume on the left, community room above, retail below, and then you can see the four-story housing project as well. So hybridizing all those elements, contextual, but also density. And that shows, again, a very important project, I think. It starts to show what it's like in terms of these urban infill projects in Los Angeles. There's a hodgepodge of things going on, but you stitch it in and brings life. And what I'm really fascinated about this project is even though it's a supportive housing project, it's actually one of the better designs, if not the best design building in this whole area. And it goes to show you, you can actually bring great design to all socioeconomic levels. And this is a great image where this was literally when the tenants had just moved in, which was a Thanksgiving dinner. Now this happened before the pandemic, of course, but it was very exciting because they all moved in 3 days before Thanksgiving. So this Thanksgiving dinner happened right when they all moved into the building. So it's very exciting to be there. And there you can see the context of Los Angeles. So there you can, of course, you can see our building, which is the white building in the front. It's next to the Coliseum. It's next to USC, and in the distant, you can see the downtown Los Angeles. Very important. This represents the nature of Los Angeles. Very dense, low density, high density but low scale. That's what Los Angeles is about. Again, furthering the need for homeless housing to be built faster and less expensive. This next project is celebrating that. It's called Eastland intersection and Annenberg Paseo. As I inferred earlier, LA needs 568,000 new units. We have so many people on the street. We need to provide new units for affordable housing. That's one of the most critical things in Los Angeles. And we're going to need to provide that in the next coming decade. So with that in mind, the city needs to build homes quickly and inexpensively. That's critical to this project. It's situated once again in South Los Angeles in a very unusual site. It's actually several city-owned parcels made available for affordable housing developers. So this is one of 1,700 properties that the city owns. And with regards to these very complex, challenging sites, the city is now bringing these to the table for nonprofit developers to provide affordable housing. And you'll see it is challenging in terms of where it's located. Many of the sites are difficult. They're lying in a very heavily trafficked corridors or next to freeways. And they're, in a sense, also composite parcels. They might be 3 different lots that need to be combined to be able to provide enough land to be able to build housing. So these challenges are very important, but we need to tackle this as architects and, for that matter, urban strategists. And that's how we can unlock this significant next step for the future of housing in Los Angeles. We have to provide housing for those in need. Context image, and you can see the wedge shape, triangular shaped site in the front there. Behind you can see these very busy freeways. That is actually the busiest freeway interchange in the world. It's the 110 and 105 freeway. And so you can see the challenge of these sites that the city owns. This is the last remnants of land that they have available in the city. And they're trying to find solutions in these challenging sites to provide spaces and places where people can live, but one needs to also tackle the issues of toxins and the issues of building next to the freeway. And that's what this was the challenge that we had to address. So with that in mind, we designed a 35,000 square foot building. It's a 54 unit housing project, and it's adjacent to Paseo that we also designed, which is very exciting. So that is a very important component as well. We provided a green lung to be able to mitigate the toxins and the noise from the freeways. It did offer also the opportunity to work with container construction. So you can see that on the left-hand side, these are the containers that were fabricated in a factory while we're doing, as you can see on the right-hand side, as we were doing the foundations on the site. So this was really important because we shaved off 1 year from the total construction time on this whole project. And just to show you the timeline, from the time we actually started the project, we started, once we got approvals for the project in terms of permits, we started working on the site utilities. We provide, at the same time we were making the units, fabricating the units in a factory. So the timeline was we did both those at the same time. And as we know, the conventional way of building is you do all the site work, site utilities, foundations, and then you build on top of it. What we were able to do is build all the units in a factory at the same time we were doing the site work, which saved us close to a year. Right now on the site, they're installing the units, which is very exciting. And there's one of the units on the left-hand side. Very conventional. They're basically 3 20-foot long by 8-foot wide shipping containers, and they're welded together to form a single 480 square foot unit. And you can see on the right-hand side, they're compact and efficient, simple open plan, kitchen, bathroom, and living room. Very simple approach, but it works. That's what we're excited about. And there's the site plan of it. It's organized along the spine of this street called Broadway, and it's a series of 16 staggered towers, for want of a better word. They go from 7 stories down to 2 stories. And you can see in the plan there that this idea, the uniqueness of the geometry played a big role as well. And there's an axonometric, more of a diagram of the units. Greater density was critical. We had to provide as many units as possible. Now they're all stacked around this very unique wedge-shaped site, but they're all connected by a series of walkways in the middle areas, so that's what connects it, as well as you can see in this diagram. So circulation in the center, and then all the units wrapping around the perimeter. Now, one of the key ideas of the project was we didn't want to create a flat, simple geometry. By shifting the geometries of each of the quote-unquote towers, it meant that sound and also the nature of noise from the freeway is mitigated somewhat by the geometry of it. You don't want a flat surface, so we calibrated this with consultants to find the most optimum way of designing the project to address that issue. And here's an axonometric of the project. And next to it, which is exciting, as you can see the Paseo, we actually vacated this one street called Athens Way and made it more pedestrian friendly and bike friendly. So this is one of the first shared streets in Los Angeles. As you know, there's a car culture in this city, and the crucial thing to this project is that we wanted to actually mitigate that. We wanted to address that. We wanted to challenge that and provide spaces for people to walk and to ride bikes. And that's essential to the city right now. And it's going in the right direction. This approach to the city is being embraced by a number of people, and certainly the city is opening this opportunity of shared streets, so you get away from cars and provide gardens, providing a variety of type of programs on these streets. So this particular Paseo that we're designing, along with the housing, provides for farmers market. There's a small lab for startup testing. There's the making and selling of goods. There's programs to promote healthy eating and fitness and job training. So all the programming of the adjacent housing on the first level is job training and amenities, which are critical to getting the homeless or getting the unhoused open to moving to the next step in terms of engaging society. And there's a view of the project. And again, the context of this carpet of development, again, low, but very dense. And again, it's interesting, this whole project. We've also been asked about how do you feel about providing housing next to a freeway. Well, frankly, these sites are the last remnants of sites available within the city. And so we see this as a case study for how we can do this. So that's critical to the solution. So not only are we creating this green lung to mitigate and to absorb any of the toxins from the freeways through the Athens Way that we've turned into the shared street, we're also providing multiple sustainable solutions, including solar power and water capture devices such as gray water systems. So we're trying to bring all these aspects to the project so it is a living organism, one that embraces a good place to live. And here you can see the Paseo that we're designing. And that's, again, was a street. Now it's going to be much more democratic towards pedestrians and bikes. This will, in fact, have, the Greenway will also have a marketplace. And that's critical, again. And the other issue is these trees that are just conceptually drawn here. We are going to be planting, working with consultants, the right trees that actually, in a sense, absorb site-specific trees and bushes that have the ability to clean the air. So that's very critical to this. You have to pick the right landscaping to be able to accomplish this. So the shrubs and the vines and the trees are all very specific to this site to absorb all the toxins from the freeways. Also become part of a larger network of urban farms in the area, and frankly, the mission of what we're trying to achieve is actually, in a sense, preserving the tradition of South Los Angeles, which is bringing more produce to what many consider a food desert. There's very few opportunities for healthy food in this area. So we see this as a great opportunity to do that. So the Paseo brings equitable to people, bike riders, and car culture at the same time. And that's an important step for Los Angeles. Just another view of the project of the Paseo. And you can see on the street level in this rendering, we will have a number of storefront spaces, and they will, again, as I said, be training and support services and administrative offices, engaging the ground plane. Another project we've done, which is a jump in scale, which is in Sunset La Cienega. It's a project that engages, again, one of the most robust neighborhoods in Los Angeles, and that is Sunset Boulevard. It's a very important, prominent intersection in the LA region. It's Sunset Strip in La Cienega, so it's the heart of the iconic Sunset Strip. And what we're trying to do is create another vibrant new hub of urban activity in this area, which frankly right now does not have that. But a little of the history here, the project is located at the corner of Sunset and La Cienega, as I mentioned. It's a winding hill-type road synonymous with cruising, for want of a better word. The strip is lined with giant billboards, bars, restaurants, and iconic music clubs, such as Whiskey A Go-Go and the Viper Room. So you can see the energy that exists. So we wanted to build on that and actually embrace that. Primarily, the design is to create view corridors through it and cuts, strategic cuts in the building, so that as opposed to a very conventional building, we do have a very important element to it, what we've done, which is create this view corridor through the building so you can see the city beyond. And that was very important. So these are early studies that we're looking at. So it was designed, frankly, as a in a sense, a public plaza with buildings that are bisect the two buildings. And there's the building itself. So wanted to show you this, a jump in scale that we're addressing right now. So you can see that the street activity is activated. You can see the retail down below and then the housing above. And you can obviously see these images, the very, very busy streets. You can see the cars whizzing by. But the patterning of this building played a very important, again, choreographing the building played a critical role. So the facade of the two towers are finished in solid patterns of smooth trowel plaster, one steel blue and the other gunpowder gray. Two different buildings, but very simple, very direct, very, in a way, principled buildings. And that was our approach. Here's two other images, the completed project. You can see on the right-hand side is the view corridor I was referring to. So that's accessible to the public between the two buildings. On the right-hand side, you can see the dynamic of the patterning of the windows. And interestingly enough, not only the pattern of the building also was reflected or incorporated or folded into the landscape strategy as well. So the windows are, in a sense, a waffle pattern. This is kind of shifted patterning, in a sense, in the building, which played a big role, in my opinion. We also folded back the windows of 48 inches. So you have this very, very strong kind of patterning or choreographed spaces on the building. So there's an example of it right there, where you begin to see how the building, the facade, can elevate the quality that one normally sees. What's also interesting is that we had to provide units, mechanical units per unit, but by folding back the actual windows, it provided an opportunity to put the unit that was hidden away. And that's something that you can't, as you can see in this building, this view right now, you actually don't see the units because they're tucked in where that fold is. And that might show it there as well. So you can see the patterning and the quality of the design, which elevated the overall solution. And this is a total of 190 units, the building. And there's a quality, that image shows the context of the building on La Cienega. And a view of the lobby. And the classic image is Sunset Boulevard with the billboards. So you can see on the buildings that we designed, we were also needed or required to provide these billboards. And that was a critical issue for the developer in terms of getting a return. So interestingly enough, we had to design around this very large billboard structures, as you can see on the left-hand side. Interestingly enough, not only did we do that, but we also built some billboards right across the street as well. We were approached by the city of West Hollywood to actually design a series of billboards throughout West Hollywood. What was interesting was that they took the approach that the kind of small infrastructural components like bus stops and billboards were never really looked at from a design standpoint, the structure to supporting the advertisement. So we embraced this concept and brought that level of design to, again, these small infrastructural components. So fittingly, our first one was right across the street from the Sunset La Cienega project. You can see on the right-hand side, as we're building the billboard, right across the street is a big hole where you can see our Sunset La Cienega project was. So interestingly enough, that particular area, Sunset Boulevard, became close to our heart. We were doing billboards and, of course, the Sunset La Cienega project. So in a sense, these projects and the billboard structures were thought of as interpretation of can you bring the visual culture of advertisement, but also bring it into the structure itself. And that's what's awfully important. That did not exist before. And there's a view of the billboard design that we did. In a sense, it's a wishbone concept. And again, positioned so that, of course, the sight lines were mitigated for drivers moving east and west along Sunset Boulevard. A very interesting project for us to handle as an architect, to do billboard structures, which I quite like. It's nice to be able to do different design strategies. And we also were commissioned to two other ones. One was a very important one called, it was a billboard structure at the Rainbow Room. So you can see on the left-hand side, this was a very, very famous disco, not disco, but club. And so we had to incorporate the sign for the club. Not only that, but the advertisement, but we also took the approach, can we also design a structure that provides seating? So you can see on the image on the left-hand side, you can actually sit at the bottom part, but the nature of the design is rethinking the convention of these type of billboard structures. So you provide stoops for people to sit and hang out. The right-hand side is another third one we did, which is again an urban intervention, a different scale, but also part of the Sunset Boulevard strip. So these were very fascinating billboard structures we had the opportunity to design. And I think this type of scale of infrastructure is always overlooked, and very important to address it. So last but not least, we're going to end up in Detroit, where in 2015 we set up an office and are working on over 10 projects that range from nonprofit museums to housing to neighborhood studies. Very exciting shift for our practice to be able to take the dynamic of working in Los Angeles and embrace a new city. So one of the key issues in terms of doing that was really try to understand Detroit. And you know, my sense is that Detroit and Los Angeles are vastly different landscapes and conditions for that matter. In LA, we are confronted with, in effect, urban infill projects. It's about dense infill lots. And that's how most of our work over the last 30 years in LA has been about. It's about stitching into this urban dense fabric. Detroit, we're faced with a very different condition. In a sense, it's an inverted figure-ground relationship of a dramatically underdeveloped neighborhood fabric, meaning when you build in Detroit, you're building to the future. You're building next to fields. You have to, in a sense, design it in such a way that someday those lots around it will actually be developed. So that was a fascinating step we took, and to really understand Detroit, to really begin to rethink that convention of how one builds in Detroit, and not simply bring Los Angeles to Detroit, but actually embrace the context and culture of Detroit and build for that. Our Detroit projects are all rooted in a larger civic strategy. Detroit's gone through enormous downturn, enormous challenges financially. And when you work in Detroit, you have to recognize that when you're working with a developer or a client, their resources are limited. So you have to design keeping that in mind. That's what our challenge was, and that's what we wanted to embrace. How can we bring quality design, architecture, with a capital A, to a city that doesn't see much of it? And that's, at this point, needless to say, when Detroit was in its heyday, during the car culture and automotive culture, it was in a much better place. So now, in a sense, it's not about the old school approach, which was about Chrysler and Ford and about those type of industry. It's a very different culture. It's a very different place right now. They don't play such a larger role. Our opinion was, and collectively, our opinion and the planning department of Detroit was to really embrace the neighborhoods, African American communities, and bring urban renewal to that area. That is critical. In the past, one has always brought, in a sense, urban renewal to downtown Detroit and use a trickle-down effect to be able to hit the neighborhoods. We took the inversion of that. We turned that idea inside out. We actually went into the neighborhoods and designed projects that brought, in a sense, a vibrancy to those areas. And that has been working with regards to Detroit right now. So we're very excited about the last 5 years we've been working there. So as we know, most American cities have been steadily growing since the 60s, but not Detroit. It's been shrinking. It has witnessed more than 3 generations of residents who've left, never to come back. And this is what we're having to deal with. Many of the streets, once lined with proud houses, are today a patchwork of open fields and dotted by a smattering of perhaps remaining houses, some of which are burnt out. That was our context. So when we were approached by Dan Gilbert and his company called Bedrock, we were commissioned to design 4 corner buildings in this larger development. In fact, it's the largest development in Detroit since Mies van der Rohe Lafayette Park. So very exciting to be participating in this. You can see in the image on the left-hand side, those are the 4 corner buildings we were designing for Bedrock and Dan Gilbert. So now what's exciting is that we started this 5 years ago, and it's a very ambitious new residential commercial project. And in a sense, kudos to Dan Gilbert and Bedrock, because he made a commitment to go back to Detroit and actually embrace it and bring urban renewal. So to his credit as a developer, that was very important. I think he bought close to 90 properties, and this is the most important one that he bought. So we're honored to be participating in this process. There you can see the context as I was referring to. This is the aerial image of the neighborhood before the project was built. And again, as I said, you can see a very different context in Los Angeles, really about a dramatically underdeveloped neighborhood fabric. And there's the overall axonometric of the project, 4 corner buildings. We also had to embrace this idea that there was old and new. There are 4 critical historic Victorian houses that was actually on the site. So we had to stitch the new buildings and recognize the importance of the Victorian houses. Also, there was retail and a variety of other type of housing, not only with the larger apartment buildings, but there were duplexes and townhouses that were designed as well. So our challenge was to address the corner. And there's a series of diagrams and drawings that we did to really bring those aspects to it. One was looking at how can we bring an idea of green space to the central area? How can we create an opportunity? So if we can design the buildings, can we create with a step massing for the buildings? So we create rooftop gardens that visually connect to this smaller scale. That was awfully important. So all the buildings were pushed down in certain areas so that it was responded accordingly to the context of adjacent buildings, including historical Victorian houses as well, as you'll see. So that was a critical component to it. So each of the buildings we did was really addressing the issue of adjacencies. One of our buildings you can see here that is now nearing completion. Oops, sorry, that seems to shifting forward. So we were inspired by, again, with the Detroit urban palette and materiality. Each of the building is clad differently. The one's out of brick, one's wood, and one's out of metal. So each building has its own unique form, own unique geometry, and recognize the aesthetic diversity of Detroit. That was critical to the whole project. And it does. These projects are really serving an incredible kind of anchor for this neighborhood hub. Our second project, as you can see here, was a brick building. So this, again, each of these units, the 4 corner buildings, are housing 36 units. So this one also is under construction. There's a shot of it right there. So that our brick building is actually under construction right now. The third one is a metal building, which again, a 36 unit building. Sorry, this seems to shifting up. There we go. Again, as I said, a third building is a metal building. Again, each one is somewhat unique. Very important. When they first approached us to do this, they wanted us to come up with 2 designs and actually copy each corner. And I argued the case that that's not appropriate, that it should be responding to where it is on that particular larger development. And they embraced that idea and did allow us that opportunity to design each building. And there's one of the first building that's done, which is a wood building. This is called John R. It's exciting for us because again, addressing the building, the massing was really responding to Victorian house, as you can see in the foreground. So we wanted to drop the scale of the building so it was commensurate to the 2-story Victorian house and push the density to the other side. So that was equally important. So again, combining old and new, try to foster social diversity and equity in the area. A number of these units are affordable, or at least affordable within a certain level. It's not affordable housing, but it's affordable to the community where it is. So we had to design very efficiently to be able to make that work. And there's a number of images, our first of 4 buildings that are completed. As you can see, all the others are at different levels of completion. And then you start to see the context. Another architect at the building on the right-hand side. So we had to design with knowing what was coming at the same time. So we wanted to really embrace the idea of formally be provocative of our geometries. So we certainly did it with our building. And there's the overall context looking at Detroit in the distance. So the project in its current condition, you can see quite a bit of it's been developed. This is a big move. This is a big step for Detroit to be able to bring urban renewal to this area. And we're excited to say that they've had great success in terms of renting the units. And again, it's they're rentals, so it's for people who are in need of housing, and that they're working closely with the community to be able to provide enough units for those who are there. The clients are not trying to push people away. They're providing these units for those who live in the neighborhood. So to end, I just wanted to quickly mention, and I know that Stephen had mentioned this earlier, we do have a new book called Architectural Social Act, and it does reinforce how our work can be placed within a larger social framework. That's critical to our work. It follows all these issues and reflects upon the course of the work over the past 2.5 decades. Specifically, we illustrate how we embrace cities and try to, in a sense, look at the neighborhoods and the culture where it's been placed and respond accordingly, and that's critical. It's also important to recognize that what we're our interest of creating, outdoor spaces to create environments that are healthy environments is critical in a post-pandemic world that we're stepping into. It's stuff we've been doing for a decade, if not longer, a decade and a half, in terms of these projects that are in urban infill in LA or the work in Detroit. But in a sense, it's positioned well for where we have to go in the future. It's about inside outside. It's about creating healthy environments to live, and that's what we've been trying to engage. Smart growth is critical. Social structures are critical. We have to commit to a political engagement. We have to really recognize that complexity comes with all that, but that really refines, in a sense, creates good architecture. And urban landscapes it's critical that we improve that and also elevate the human condition. That's what's driven us for years, and that will continue. So I'm going to end here by thanking my team for all their wonderful efforts in all these projects. This is a team effort. We have over 52 projects in our office, and it's about all of us together making this work. We have 25 talented designers throughout the US who've joined us, and also we have a small team also in Detroit. So they're all dedicated to making great cities more dynamic, more equitable, and more livable for all. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Lorcan, for your very impressive presentation over quite a diverse range of projects. Let's begin our conversation.
Okay.
With the Julius Schulman house, you made the observation that the original case study houses were the testing ground for architectural ideas in Los Angeles in the 20th century, and that multi-residential housing projects perhaps are the new testing ground. Would you like to elaborate on this line of thinking?
Absolutely. It's a very interesting question. For a number of years ago, you're absolutely right. If you were an architect committed to good architecture, good design, your patrons were individuals or families who, in a sense, would contact you to do these wonderful houses on hillsides. And that was fine when I was younger, but what's really fascinating is that patron has changed. The new patron of architecture are, in a sense, educated, committed, fascinating developers who see that we need to engage the city. And that's what has changed significantly. So the patron that used to be for the individual, in a sense, that jewel on a hillside, is now projects that are stitched into the cities, and that's who our clients are. These are developers who certainly have, they need to have a return. It has to be a win-win situation for them. But what's most interesting about it is that I'm excited because they recognize how important it is for us to tackle these projects in cities, that we have to design for the future. And given that there are so many people who are still continuing, and they will continue to engage cities, we need to design good places for them to live. We have to think of that in a critical way. Thus, in a sense, the case study represented the old school, where you had individuals designing these amazing projects in the mid-century, 1950s, 60s. The new, in a sense, the new paradigm is the type of work that we're doing, multi-unit projects, mixed-use projects in cities to bring that same energy. And thus it's true, the new patron is that type of developer as opposed to the individuals or a couple who lived on hillsides. And they were the ones who were embracing great architecture, great design, as the case study houses were. But now it's changed. And that's what's very fascinating to me. Most of our work are larger urban infill projects addressing those issues, but the clients are wonderful. They're people who are on the same page as us. We're kindred spirits, and that's what's very exciting for us.
That's really interesting. I mean, talking about these larger scale multi-res projects, you've designed a number of private and public multi-residential projects, and I wonder What are the architectural and logistical differences between these two types of projects and perhaps between these two types of clients?
Right, that's a very good point as well. As I mentioned, our clients who have commissioned us, they're of course the nonprofit developers who are doing the affordable housing or homeless housing, are equally fascinated with design. They see value in design. So the projects we're doing for Martin Luther King Boulevard or the Eastland intersection, those are supportive housing. But those clients, the quality of design we bring to that type of project is equal to our private developers. And that's something that's very important to us. We're convinced that, as I said, all design should be available to all. A good quality design should be available to all. And so on that note, there really isn't a differentiation at this point. Now, granted, there were other firms who were doing supportive housing, and perhaps based on, of course, the constrained budgets, they have not been able to elevate that work, but we, as a practice, is committed to doing that. We do bring design, but what we do is we do it in a very strategic, principled way, meaning that there's efficiency built in the project, but it frees up opportunities for create strategic openings in the building to bring light and air to actually, in a sense, the same principle we brought to private developments. We make sure we access from exterior for these projects. Both of the projects I showed you are all accessed from exterior. That means, thus it provides passive design strategies, meaning that we can have natural air throughout the units. The quality that we bring to it is more about the quality of space. And that's what we've been able to bring to the table. So right now, as you can see, our Martin Luther King Boulevard and certainly Eastland is the same level, frankly, as the more private development projects.
Staying with these housing projects, have you found your design explorations for public housing influencing your private housing projects or vice versa?
I think they're equal in value. Each one is situated and informed by the culture and the context of where it is. That's our DNA with all our projects. So each one is embracing that concept. But yes, in one sense, that's a very good point. I think the supportive housing or the affordable housing projects, there are quite a few more constraints on that with regards to when you get funding from federal and state. There's certain parameters and criteria we have to comply with, which is a battle where you have to respond accordingly. The other issue is that, with terms of affordable housing or homeless housing, is you have to work with prevailing wage, meaning that it's a more expensive, meaning union. Thus, you have to be much more nimble about how you bring good design to those projects, because if you have to work with prevailing wage, it's more expensive than perhaps a private developer who can hire a contractor who's less expensive. So there are those aspects of it, but overall, I think all of our projects are driven by the parameters that what is brought to the table, meaning context, culture, and all the politics and all the other variables that we deal with. So the DNA of our work that underpins it all is trying to see all those forces, embrace them, and that will help ultimately to produce better architecture.
With the Eastland Intersections project, you mentioned the willingness of the city to embrace these forgotten spaces, and also your ideas for a living lung and the farms and rooftop farms and Paseo. Would you like to elaborate on how you and the city are responding to the environmental issues of our times through these projects?
Right. No, absolutely. That was a very interesting project in a sense that whenever that project was request for qualifications, we teamed up with Clifford Bridge Housing, that we had done the Martin Luther King Boulevard project, MLK project, and so we landed it. But the key thing was this: the city not only were open to the idea of working with containers, but because one of the critical issues in this day and age, and certainly within Los Angeles, to provide housing as fast as we can. So if you can provide that scenario where you're building the units while you're actually doing the site work, that's a critical issue. Time is money. If you can build it faster, that's crucial. The city embraced that idea. The second issue that they embraced was they looked at us and looked at this project in a sense as a case study, for want of a better word, to how they can address, how they can build more housing in Los Angeles, because again, we need over 550,000 units. So how do we build more housing faster? So they see our project as crucial because there's very little land left in Los Angeles as you know, it's great. It has great density. So they do have properties or sites, very challenging sites like this one on Eastland, the Eastland intersection site. And thus, they are looking at us and working with us collaboratively to come up with a solution to be able to provide housing, but also address the issues of building next to a freeway, building into areas that are not ideal. So thus, they're very open to the idea when we approached them and said, look, we really need to provide space to be able to plant trees, shrubs, and landscaping that will, in a sense, pull in the toxins and to be able to create a more healthy environment. They bought the idea, they liked it. So they actually allowed us to, in a sense, vacate that road and provide, in a sense, a shared street for pedestrians and bikes, as well as the number of cars that are, if necessary. You can see there's a road, a meandering road that slips through, but that's not going to be the key access. That's primarily a green space. But they like the idea because they see this as a prototype or a case study for how they can address this issue. There's very little land available in Los Angeles for supportive housing. So they see this as a case study, and when it's done, they want to be proud of it, as we do. So we are accomplishing what we need to. And frankly, what was exciting as well is the Annenberg Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization, is providing $2.5 million to build the Paseo. Thus, it's called the Annenberg Paseo. So not only was the city embraced the idea, they liked the idea of us using this road and vacating it and provide a park area, but also the Annenberg Foundation provided the resources and funding to be able to make it work. So it was a very interesting public-private partnership in that way.
No, that's great to hear. Going back to your beginnings, can you tell us a bit more about your history and how did you come to be an Irish architect practicing in Los Angeles?
Right, a good story. I was actually born in Dublin, Ireland many years ago, and I came to the U.S. at a very young age. My dad was a film actor, so he traveled quite a bit extensively in Europe and in the U.S. making films. So we, in a way, I was a thespian son. So the whole family, was 5 of us, 5 kids, and then mom and dad. So I traveled quite a bit when I was young. So in a sense, I lived in Dublin my early years. I came to the Los Angeles from the age of 2 to 8, went back to Dublin between 8 and 15 years old. Thus, I went to school in Europe in the formative years in Ireland. And I did the equivalent, I'm not sure what it is in Australia, but it was the inter and the leaving certificates there. And then I came back to the US for university. But I have to say the reason I became an Irish-American architect, or an American architect with an Irish background, is that I was always fascinated with the work that was in Ireland. Dublin is, in a sense, been influenced by Corbusier and influenced by modernism. So I remember that when I chose to be an architect, which also there's another story. My dad, before he became a film actor, studied architecture. So he has a Bachelor of Architecture degree. So that played a big role. So when I came back at 16 years old, I had graduated and I went to university, quite young actually. But I said, well, I'll try architecture, and I fell in love at the first day. Just loved drawing, loved the whole culture of being an architect at a very young age. But I think that my work was never part of the LA School of Architecture. It was very much more influenced by European architecture, and one can see perhaps that in the work from early years, not only having worked with I.M. Payne Partners on the Louvre Museum in Paris. I loved going back to Europe, working on that both in New York and Paris. But also my later years, I always feel like there's some very interesting aspects of the work that is also heavily impacted by a fascination with work that was not only in Europe. And also I have to say that, housing in Europe, social housing, is such a critical component of how one looks at the history of architecture. So all of that kind of influence played a big role for me. So yes, I am an Irish-American architect, but very much influenced by the work that I was aware of and exposed to, not only in Dublin, but I also lived in London, I lived in Madrid, I lived in Rome, all these different places. So I was always drawn actually to modern architecture, fascinating enough. Even in cities where they have an incredible history of a variety of different approaches to architecture. I was always fascinated by modern architecture. Thus, that's how I came here. I was more of a Dublin, Los Angeles background, and
fantastic.
That's what I was committed to.
So following on from that, can you give us some insight into how you collaborate within your practice, and how do you work with your staff and how you manage your clients?
Absolutely. As I said, very gifted people here. We have an iterative process where we try to, when we get a new commission, we look at a number of ideas. Here are 3 different ideas we could look at. So the beginning points are, hey, can we look at these 2 or 3 ideas? And so they are embracing that. They're excited because in a sense they're involved all the different stages. So that's really great to be able to empower the team, so to speak. So we look at a variety of solutions, and then we meet and we look through it, and we narrow it down. If I feel like it's important to go a direction, I will say that, and that's how my role is. In a sense, I'm the arbiter of that, in a sense. I believe that's a very healthy way of working, that you look at a number of solutions, an iterative process, and thus you come up with a better solution. So we work very, very, in a way, holistically that way. So to me, that's a very strong way. I'm not the type of architect that does a sketch and say, develop this. I really like to talk about each project and look at the context, the culture of where it is. We do a research component in our work, understand where it is, look at the history of it, look at a variety of different approaches which are responding not only to the program, the client, but also the other variables, aesthetic issues, artistry, looking at politics of where it is. We have a variety of different approaches we take on the projects. But it's a very holistic approach. So it's a great culture we have here.
And that's translated into how you deal with your clients as well?
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Yeah, again, as I said, we present the clients, different ideas. What we do is we always pick the one that we want to go. Thus, I think they're hiring us to come up with a decision or a solution. So we show them their process and we say why we got where we got. So it's an interesting way of working through the process, not only in the practice, but also when we present it, we show a variety of different solutions, but we also say, you hired us to give a decision in terms of a solution we should go, and we always present that.
You ended with the Detroit work and did talk a little bit about the difference between working in Detroit and Los Angeles. I just wonder whether you want to elaborate a bit more on that and how one is influencing the other.
In a sense, Detroit was the one thing I would like to learn from Detroit is that you have more financial constraints on the projects, and to me that's equally valuable to me, because I think the projects we do in Los Angeles, we have the same parameters that we have in Detroit. But I also think that what was fascinating for me is more of other aspects of Detroit, meaning the bigger idea. We are involved with neighborhood studies throughout Detroit. We've been commissioned by the city of Detroit to do two neighborhood studies in 2 very important areas of Detroit and come up with solutions, larger ideas, larger brushstroke approaches to how we could further a particular area, how we can bring urban renewal in certain areas. So what's really fascinating with Detroit is our role is not simply to be the architect, it's to be an urban strategist, to an architectural strategist. And that's what's really fascinating by it. So for us, we had, in a way, Detroit was a new frontier for many people, because the planning was embracing and wanting architects of note or quality architects to come to Detroit and to be involved. So for us to be able to look at these neighborhood studies, but also then to go into the neighborhood and be commissioned to do projects in that neighborhood was equally valuable, because we had the background and understanding the culture of where it was, the ecology of where it was. So we try to bring that aspect to Los Angeles, and that's awfully important. So that's what I learned from Detroit, is see it as a holistic way and then zero into the project, but understand that you have, in a sense, an understanding of the area where it is and the culture where it is. So we're bringing that back to Los Angeles. And also the planning department, it's much easier to get permits in Detroit than Los Angeles. Los Angeles is an enormous bureaucracy. It has so many different departments in terms of building and safety and also planning. But here in Detroit, in a sense, they're trying to make it easier to actually build. So that's another thing I would love to bring to Los Angeles. Very, very unique, very different, but Detroit has been a pleasure working with the planning department and the building safety in Detroit.
No, I think it's very important, this idea of strategic thinking that we as architects can bring to projects and to a broader approach to how the built environment is created.
Yes.
Yeah. Just finishing off, your book and your philosophy, Architecture as a Social Act, is a culmination of your experiences to date. Looking forward, where do you see that your ideas and explorations are getting the most traction? And what positives do you see moving forward, and what final comments would you like to make to our audience?
Sure, absolutely. I have always been, in a sense, fascinated with the role of an architect and why are we architects? And I've always been convinced that certainly after just starting as a practice, within 8 or 10 years of starting my practice, close to 20 years ago, I would challenge myself. I want to do work of consequence. I want to address ways in which bring in artistry, bring aesthetics to the role of an architect, but also do stuff to look at social agency, to recognize that social connectivity is critical to these types of projects that we're doing. And that my dissertation, I have a master's degree, MA in History and Theory, from the Architects Association, and that was my dissertation when I was in school. So I was able to bring that further in terms of the practice. So thus this book, Architecture as a Social Act, is something I've been interested in for a very long time. And what's interesting though is that aspect that underpins all our work is in a sense will continue. That aspect of our work, the idea of social agency we bring to the architecture and our buildings, is bringing really interesting clients to the table. They recognize the value of that. And interestingly enough, within that component of it, we think that's the one that will continue. Our work will continue, and will continue with those ideas I've been addressing. So it's the underpinned ideas of all of our work in terms of the work we're doing and the work we're going to do in the future. And clients embrace that, they really do. Certainly now, I mean, we've gone through, as you know, both you guys and us have been through a terrible, and continue in this very challenging times in terms of the pandemic, but you have to create healthy environments. And this aspect, not only of this engagement in terms of social engagement, but providing opportunities for people to gather, to provide opportunity in terms of social agency in terms of projects, they play a big role. And I know that in a sense it's a challenge, because in one sense people are not engaging each other right now as much as they used to, but I believe that's an inherent quality of human beings. They want to engage each other, and there are ways that we will. And so I see that aspect of our work continuing. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're right about the social engagement part of who we are as people. But
we will get there again. It might change, it might be a new norm, but it's going to be important for us to get there, because we are inherently social, and that people want to connect. And that is something that I will see, I'm convinced, will continue with all of our work.
And the ideas that you're following will evolve and create something new once we get out of where we are at the moment. So I think that's a wonderful point to end on, and thank you for your presentation, and it's been great to talk to you today and hear these wonderful insights. So I wish you all the best for the future, and Brickworks and I are very pleased to have introduced you to our broad architectural audience, and we look forward to your future progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, and I'll now invite Brett to conclude this evening's event. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorcan. That was a really fantastic presentation, providing a wonderful insight into your projects and practice. Thank you again for taking the time to share your work and your thoughts with our audience. Thank you also to Stephen for his involvement, and to everyone who joined us for tonight's event. Please keep your eyes on the Brickworks website for more events like this, and make sure you subscribe to receive invitations for upcoming events. Thank you again for joining us, and please enjoy the rest of your evening.